Chapter 12. Chapel Purgatory.
The summons came as a slip of paper pushed under the door. No ceremony, no seal, just the St. Oswald's crest and a single line.
Miss Rose Hartley is requested to report to the headmaster's office at 11:30. Underneath, punctual. Caroline picked it up before Rose could reach it.
If that's an invitation to tea, you are absolutely wearing full-dress uniform, she muttered. But this smells more like we request clarification of circumstances.
Rose took the note and read it once, then again.
It's probably about the archive, she said as neutrally as she could. I stayed late the other day.
The lie came out too smoothly, even for her. Caroline raised an eyebrow.
Of course, she said, because the headmaster definitely has time to speak personally to everyone who lingers too long in the library. She didn't press, but her silent "be careful" hung in the air as Rose left the room. The headmaster's office was in that wing where the corridors were even more polished than the rest. The benefactor's boards gleamed as if lined up for inspection.
The secretary nodded without looking up from her monitor.
"Go in," she said. "The headmaster is expecting you. Mr. Whitby as well."
Rose walked in.
The office was high-ceilinged, with a large window onto the courtyard. The headmaster sat behind his desk. Matt sat in one of the armchairs, turned slightly sideways. His uniform was impeccable, tie perfectly knotted. Only his hands betrayed tension, clasped too tightly in his lap.
"Miss Hartley," the headmaster indicated the other chair, "do sit down." She perched on the edge, bag by her foot.
"I gather," the headmaster began, "that last night's excursion to the archive was a spontaneous urge to commune with the school's history."
His tone was dry, the irony so lightly applied it could be ignored if you wanted.
"I went to finish some work," she said. "The archive is noisy during the day. It's hard to concentrate." The corner of his mouth twitched.
"An original understanding of volunteering," he said. "Unfortunately, the rules stipulate that pupils do not roam the building after curfew, and certainly not into spaces like the archive without staff supervision." He turned to Matt.
"Mr. Whitby tells me he found you down there by chance," he went on. "He says he went to see why the lights were on."
For a fraction of a second, Rose considered contradicting him. Matt sat very still, but she could feel how closely he was listening to every word. "We did meet there," she said carefully. "We hadn't arranged it."
The headmaster nodded. "I am pleased," he said, "that your accounts at least match on that point. The night watch reported 2 pupils in the archive after hours. There was no need to involve parents yet."
The "yet" dropped heavily between them.
"St. Oswald's," he continued, "is not a school that addresses every problem with suspensions and expulsions. We believe responsibility can be taught in other ways as well."
Back to basics, Rose thought, even before the words came.
"Therefore," the headmaster folded his hands as if in prayer, "instead of a routine administrative punishment, you are both being given an opportunity to repair," he paused, searching for the word, "the trust you have breached in a practical manner."
He drew a thin bundle of papers from a file. "In the old part of the chapel there is a former lectern gallery," he explained. "Neglected for years, dust, books, benches in need of cleaning. There is also a small anteroom no one has tidied for some time. We decided that a pair of our most," another pause, "engaged pupils would be ideal to restore the place to its former dignity." Rose had the odd sensation of hearing her nocturnal break-in translated into the language of a prospectus.
"This is supposed to be a punishment?" she blurted before she could stop herself.
The headmaster looked at her calmly. "It is meant to be a lesson," he corrected. "Physical work, cleaning, basic conservation. You, Miss Hartley, enjoy order in documents. You, Mr. Whitby, enjoy historical privileges. Now you will both have the chance to see how much effort it takes to keep them in good condition." He handed each of them a sheet. At the top, conservation task, chapel, lectern. Beneath, dates, times, a list of duties, sorting, inventory, cleaning.
"For the next 3 weeks," he said, 3 afternoons a week, under Mr. Wilson from maintenance. Attendance is, of course, compulsory. Absences will count as refusal to carry out the sanction."
Rose clenched her jaw.
"And if," she began. "If you feel the punishment is unjust," he said gently, "you may appeal to the school board. I am sure they will be eager to hear the case of a pupil found in the archive after hours with documents she was not authorized to remove."
He smiled, polite, utterly at odds with his words.
"Do we understand one another?"
"Yes," Rose said, before she could bite her tongue.
"Yes," Matt echoed. "Good," the headmaster nodded. "Think of this not as humiliation, but as a privilege. Few pupils get to see the old chapel from the inside, let alone spend so much time there." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "And one more thing," he added as they gathered their papers. "I expect last night's incident to remain between us. St. Oswald's does not need gossip. It needs results."
The door clicked shut quietly behind them.
They walked side by side in silence, identical sheets in their hands.
"Congratulations, Hartley," Matt said at last. "We're on track for top marks in dust and archaeology."
"At least they didn't throw us out," she said. "Yet."
"Yet," he repeated. "Most frequently used word in this place." They both glanced down at the line, "Location of work."
Chapel, side entrance, old lectern.
A familiar sting flared in Rose's chest.
The ruins where they had sat in the rain were now their official place of penance. The system had just sent them back to where they had already started digging up the foundations.
The chapel's side door was heavy. Mr. Wilson shoved it open with his shoulder, then turned to them with the expression of a man dragooned into leading a team-building exercise. "Tools," he said, pointing at a bucket of rags, bottles of cleaning fluid, 2 old mops, and a crate of brushes.
He didn't seem interested in any questions.
"You've got your job list," he went on. "Dust, cobwebs, books to sift, benches to wipe. No fireworks. If something falls on your head, I'm not filing it as an accident at work, just stupidity on punishment duty."
He pivoted and left, the echo swallowing him. The old lectern gallery jutted into the side of the chapel like a wooden island. A raised platform, a few rows of benches, a reading stand from which people had once read letters, prayers, speeches. Now everything was coated with a thick, even layer of dust. The air smelled of stale wood, cold stone, and long-forgotten services. It was freezing. The tall, narrow windows let in only thin, gray light. If there were radiators, they had died long ago. Their breath turned visible as soon as it left their mouths.
"Atmospheric," Matt muttered, "almost brochure-worthy."
Rose pulled on gloves, ignoring him. She grabbed the first cloth and set to work on the lectern. Every movement was precise, almost aggressive. as though she could scrub the last 2 nights out of existence.
Matt ostentatiously wandered over to one of the shelves along the wall. He hauled down a heavy, leather-bound volume. Instead of setting it down gently, he dropped it onto a bench hard enough to make the wood complain.
"Careful," Rose snapped without turning. "This isn't your private gym."
"They're only books," he said. "Old sermons, letters, codes of conduct. This place is built on stacks of them, one more or less." He reached for another volume and thumped it down again.
She wiped harder. Dust rose in a cloud, occluding her view.
"If you're trying to annoy me, you don't need the noise," she said. "Being here is quite enough."
"Not many people dare say things like that to me in church," he observed.
"This isn't a church," she said. "It's a warehouse for tradition, out of service, but still on the inventory."
For a while they worked in near silence, broken only by the rasp of her cloth on wood and the thud of books on benches. Their breath plumed in the same rhythm, though both pretended not to notice.
She worked her way down the rows, methodical, almost elegant in her efficiency. He cleared shelf after shelf, turning them into teetering piles on the table.
The tension was thicker than the dust. Neither of them mentioned being pressed together in the archive the night before, counting heartbeats. Neither said journal, page, murderers. But everything they did was an answer to that night. Her stubborn refusal to look at him, his deliberately careless noise.
At one point, a book slipped and crashed right at her feet. She flinched back. "Sorry," he said, in a tone that made it impossible to tell whether he meant the book or anything else.
"It's fine," she said coolly. "Old texts fall off pedestals all the time."
She snapped the lid of the polish bottle too hard. The cap cracked against the neck. Matt leaned on a bench, gaze roaming the gallery.
"You know what's funny?" he said. "That our punishment is polishing a space where people once gave speeches about honor, tradition, duty, and now the cleaning is done by the latest targets of that tradition." "Maybe it's the first sensible part of the pastoral program," she said. "Make pupils clean up after their betters." "Assuming we're the ones who made the mess," he said, "and not the names on those walls."
She didn't answer. She looked up at the upper part of the chapel, faded inscriptions, old plaques, stained glass that let through too little light.
Maybe that was why she was cold, she thought. Not just the temperature. After a few hours, their work was finally visible. The lectern was no longer gray. The benches had turned brown again. The book heaps had transformed into neat columns on a side table, waiting to be sorted.
Mr. Wilson appeared once, just long enough to glance around and grunt something like, "Not bad. Few more sessions and we can bore people to death with readings in here again."
Then he vanished. Matt had drifted closer to the narrow stairs at the side of the lectern, a steep little staircase up to a tiny gallery above the stand. The wood creaked under his weight. "Careful," Rose called. "If you go through, I'll have to write an accident report. I don't have time." "Relax," he said. "If something gives way, it'll be metaphorical." On one of the steps, someone long ago had gouged something into the wood. Matt stopped and bent down. He scraped away dust with his finger, exposing old, worn letters. 2 pairs of initials linked by a crude arrow. J and A. He stared at it in silence for a moment, then turned his head. "Hartley," he called, "come and look. Turns out we're not the first idiots to think doing things here after hours was a good idea." She left the lectern,
wiped her hands on her trousers, and came over. The staircase was so tight she had to stand 2 steps below him to see. He pointed with a fingernail.
"Romantic, isn't it?" he said with a crooked smile. "Julian and Arthur, like something out of a truly dreadful play."
"They're just letters, Matt," she said slowly. "J and A are statistically the most common initials in the country. It could be James and Annie, or Josie and Adam."
"Not in this chapel," he said, voice suddenly hardening, "and not with that arrow. I've seen that hand in my father's papers, Hartley. Even when it tries to look casual, it still reads like an order."
"Then it's not romance," she said at once. "It's evidence."
"Everything's evidence if you push hard enough," he said. "But admit it, there's a certain symmetry. You and I cleaning up after them. History has a thing for reruns."
Rose leaned closer to see the date. The wood was worn, but the numbers still legible. The same year stamped on the box in the archive. "So this is where," she began, "where they met?"
"Apparently," he said. "Julian and my uncle, J and A." The smile still sat on his face, but his hand on the rail was trembling.
She noticed. "What's wrong, Whitby?" she asked quietly. "Are the ghosts too close?"
He turned towards her, still 2 steps above. From there he could look down on her, but something in his expression was different, less armored.
"I thought this place was just another backdrop," he said. "A pretty setting for speeches, photos, balls, not a signature."
He touched the initials again. "I never saw this," he added. "I must have walked past 1,000 times. I know every plaque up there, but not this." His finger paused on the A. He looked shaken, genuinely off balance, as if the 2 letters were 1 step too far.
"It's not just ghosts," he said at last very quietly. "I hate this place." The words came out blunt, without irony.
"The chapel?" she asked. "Or St. Oswald's?"
"This," he said, indicating the arc of the gallery, the benches, the lectern. "The way everything here is built so people like my uncle have somewhere to stand while they tell everyone else who to be. So they can talk about sacrifice, standing on the bones of the people they sacrificed."
He swallowed. "When I was a kid, my father brought me here after every big event," he said. "Showed me the plaques, told me how Arthur built the school, how he fought for standards." He snorted. "He'd plant me right here on this platform and say, 'One day you'll stand here too, Matthew. You'll talk about our legacy.'" He gripped the rail harder. The shaking in his hand was more obvious now. "And he broke off. All I could think was how much I never wanted to stand where he'd stood."
Rose watched him. In the corner of her eye, she saw their faint reflection in a small side window, 2 pupils in dusty uniforms, standing above carved letters like mourners at a grave.
"So why are you still here?" she asked at last. "At this school, with that name?"
He shrugged, but the gesture was heavy. "Because hate and debt are very similar currencies," he said, "and St. Oswald's accepts both."
He forced a crooked smile, trying to make a joke of it.
"Don't get too excited, Hartley," he added. "This isn't confession. I'm not about to kneel at your feet on the stone floor."
"I didn't ask for confession," she said. "Just for you to stop pretending you're comfortable here."
For a moment, their eyes locked.
"Fine," Matt said. "Consider it written."
He nodded towards the carved initials. "I hate this place as much as you do."
"Not the same way," she said automatically. "Differently. But maybe that's enough."
Down below, the piles of books still waited to be sorted. Mr. Wilson would be back in an hour to check their progress. The journal in Rose's bag, the missing page in Matt's pocket, the initials in the wood. Together, they were becoming their own unofficial archive.
And though both of them were dust-streaked and grubby, in one respect, they were clean, in their hatred of a place that had taught them to love its ghosts more than its living.